Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Alias Secure AF podcast, the podcast about all things cybersecurity. I'm your host, Teddy Underkoffler. Today I am joined with Robert, security engineer here at Alias, and we are going to talk about some of the stranger devices that he's seen while on a pen test. So I know normally whenever you're on a pen test or you're running a scan or things like that, you'll pick up the typical devices like printers, obviously computers, things of that sort. But what are some of the ones that kind of stood out in more unique and unexpected ways?
Yeah, so like you said, we see a lot of expected devices, things like printers, desktop computers, that kind of thing. However, what I really find a lot more interesting than those kind of devices is what you can find when you kind of poke around a network and, kind of look for the unexpected. Things with open web ports that you can, browse to in a web browser even. Very simple, and just, see like, what is this? What does it do? And you see all kinds of devices. A super common one that you might not expect is something like a lighting controller. So sometimes lighting for a building may be managed over a web browser. But you also see, like you said, also a bunch of just weird stuff that you don't expect. So, for example, one of my favorites that I see, not too often, but a lot more common in kind of retail environments, is digital signage. So, sometimes stores will in the store have electronic signs or outside the store on, say, a billboard or something like that. And in a lot of cases, these are controlled remotely. So, somebody doesn't have to walk around and swap those all out manually.
Yeah.
And in many cases, those kind of simple devices that are controlled remotely have very little access control or security features. So you may find on a network just an open, accessible electronic signage. And there was actually one particular instance where we were on a pen test and we kind of hit a wall. So we kind of backed up to take a better look around and see what was there. And I found what looked like an electronic signage controller. And I was thinking like, oh, this is probably like, the walls of the establishment. It mentioned, sales and things like that. And, we were jokingly like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if we, left a little message like Alias was here? And, ultimately didn't do that. But what was really funny is when we went to leave the pen test and, we're on our way out and I'm packing all my things up in my car. And I just happened to look up towards the street on a very busy street. And I see the electronic billboard.
Oh, my goodness.
Flashing the exact images I had seen on this web interface not too long ago.
Oh,
and
no.
realize, this wasn't just some small indoor sign.
It was the giant billboard.
It was
outside.
The massive billboard out front.
Ouch. And so you had the potential to put stuff on that billboard.
Absolutely. Because like I said, in many of these cases, these are, afterthoughts when it comes to security. Or security is an afterthought in these cases. Because they don't really see this as a threat.
Yeah, I've used an outdoor billboard before. As a marketer, I've had to manage one, and that system was not very complicated. It wasn't very in-depth. I don't even think I had to log in or log out. I think I just clicked the app on my desktop, and it pulled up, and I was able to make changes.
Yeah, that tends to be the case with a lot of these smaller devices. Organizations don't really think about that threat. Though it is a very real threat of, vandalism. You don't want somebody just deleting all your files for that billboard and then replacing it with whatever they may want.
Yeah, that would definitely not be a good thing to have happen. So what is something else that you found that you thought was interesting?
So one that was a little more mundane, not quite as flashy and interesting as a massive roadside billboard. We were doing a pen test for a financial institution, and they had a service where they would on-site print checks for people, and you could control this check printer remotely. So there was a web interface for this check printer, and we were looking at it, and we were like, oh, this has a history of all the checks printed for this device. And you think about what's on a check. You have people's names, addresses, certain limited account information. Not something you want just accessible for sure. And we realized we even had the potential to go through the motions on this device and act as if we're trying to print checks.
No way.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Very tempting to just print checks for an Alex for Kansas.
Oh, that would have been phenomenal. So, but they would have been legitimately printed checks that you potentially, I don't know, could have done something with. I don't know if there was any specific account tied to it, or you could look that up or commit any sort of fraud, but it's crazy to think that check printers are something I've never really considered.
Yeah, that threat was absolutely there, as it had a stored history of all the checks that were printed. So you could look back and go, oh, this person, this has all their information already filled out in the history. Just repeat that job, and now you have checks in somebody else's name.
I imagine if you were able to print a check in somebody else's name, you could probably pretty well successfully social engineer a bank teller into being able to get account access or something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a scenario where it's not even a fake check because it's a legitimately printed check from the bank itself. There's no telltale signs of a counterfeit check or anything like that.
Completely legitimate.
Still fraud,
sure,
but...
Yeah. Still
but
something you
convincing.
can't do, but yes. That's an interesting one. What else do you have?
Something we run into not too often as kind of a category of things I like to call real-life CTF objectives. Because, you're doing online CTFs, maybe try hack me, hack the box, that kind of thing. And in many scenarios, you'll have an objective, you'll have a flag to capture. And it'll be almost comical sometimes. It'll be like, this is the flag.txt. And then inside the flag, it's it says the password is this, and you think oh, there's no way I would ever find something like this in a real environment. This is just for a lab environment, just to make it easy on people to learn. But there's been a handful of times where we've run into things that, in a way, are like real life CTF objectives. You may be browsing around some file shares and find a file that contains a list of user accounts for different vendors for a business, and not only store the email used to access that account, but maybe even the passwords, so that multiple people can access this document and make orders from a vendor if needed.
That's, geez, I don't even know what to say at something like that, because that's terrifying. You always talk about, especially with vendors, third-party vendor risk. What if you get compromised because the vendor got compromised? But someone could genuinely social engineer you using their information.
Absolutely. And, I really like this kind of category of findings because it's not just, oh, we exploited a machine and we got domain admin access and, we kind of, quote-unquote, won the pen test. It's... we found a real threat in the environment because somebody thought it was a good idea to store passwords in an Excel sheet.
Yeah.
And, you might want to mitigate that because while it may not lead to domain access for that specific site, you could do a lot with a company vendor account.
There's a lot of real, genuine threat that could happen because of that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you have any other stories or interesting finds that you would like to share before I ask kind of my final question?
I have a couple that I can run through pretty quickly because they're not all that interesting.
Okay.
Well, they're interesting, but there's not a whole lot to them. They're
Sure.
pretty one-dimensional.
Let's hear it.
So, in one scenario, we found a wirelessly connected pizza maker.
Pizza maker. Okay.
So this pizza maker had a web interface because what it was doing is it allowed people to use a tablet to punch in an order for a custom pizza to come out of this robotic pizza maker. And the way it was controlled was through the web interface being opened on a tablet next to it.
Uh-huh.
And that web interface could be opened by anything on the network. And you could just browse to that address, and then, you have the full control scheme for the pizza maker. Punch in, I want a pepperoni and olive pizza. And it even had a webcam to watch the inside of the pizza maker as it puts together your pizza and spits it out.
Uh-huh. So you're telling me you could have potentially ordered a pizza, watched it get made, and then just never really have to do anything with the pizza again?
Absolutely. In some cases, something like this could even be accessed remotely.
So if someone could get in your system and remotely order how many pizzas cost you money, cost you time, cost you resources, and actually back up any genuine orders that you probably could have had.
Yep. And, in a way, even a denial of service or a denial of pizza attack, if you will, by just spitting out, fake pizza orders and nobody can get a pizza.
That's ridiculous. I love it.
I guess one other interesting find that we had was what we lovingly call the pig turbo.
What?
The pig turbo. Because we opened up this web interface, and all we saw was just a picture of a pig, and then a little diagram with arrows pointing over to what looks like a fan, and then pointing down to some kind of measurement. And we can't understand anything on this web page because it's all in a different language. So we're like, this must just be a pig turbo. Just the first thing that came to mind.
Right.
And, after a little bit of digging, we found that what it really was just measuring emission levels from livestock at a farm.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it made a whole lot more sense. But
but pig turbo is a great name for it as well.
I think so. Yep.
Awesome. So then my question for you is, with all of these unique and semi-unexpected items that you guys find, how would somebody go about trying to figure out what is even open, like these odd devices, and how would they even go about trying to secure them? Is this something that you would expect them to do, or would they have to bring in outside help like Alias to pen test and find these things?
I think, a lot of this could be handled in-house. You could do scanning of your own network and just saying, okay, what devices have port 80 and 443 open? Because that's where you see most web interfaces is on one of those two ports. However, I do think there is still something to be added by somebody outside coming in who knows nothing about your network. And in the case of Alias, we're curious. We want to look for these weird, interesting things. So we dive deep and, search far and wide across the network to say, what is there and what can we do with it? So I think there is also that value from a pen test or something like that.
Yeah. So there's the value from the pen test, and then, a final takeaway for people listening and watching is just keep in mind what you have connected. Don't forget these little things, because check printers are very valid. A very interesting way that people could potentially commit fraud with your company. Digital signage, that could definitely hurt your brand if someone was able to take control of that and put things up there that you didn't want to be up there.
Absolutely.
So just keep an eye on that stuff, huh?
Yep. And I think to touch on protecting these kinds of things a little better, it's really more about protecting everything around it. As in a lot of cases, the vendors for these devices don't make it easy or don't give you the option whatsoever to add access control or any kind of security features. So, it may involve putting them in maybe a DMZ network that has very limited access, kind of separate from most people's access, kind of sandboxing it so you have to have credentials and to even get on the network to be able to access these things.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Awesome. Well, did you have anything else you wanted to add about this topic?
Don't think so.
Perfect. Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.